The old samurai Akita stared into the crackling fire, his mind lost in dark memories. For years he had lived in solitary exile, haunting the remote mountainside like a restless ghost. But on this moonless night, a sudden pounding shattered the eerie silence, jolting him from his brooding trance. Heart-pounding, Akita grabbed his sword and silently padded to the heavy wooden door. Peering through the crack, he froze in disbelief. 10 women stood on his doorstep, each clad in fine silk robes and wielding razor-sharp katanas. Their faces were obscured by ornate masks, but Akita sensed an aura of grim determination radiating from them. Without a word, the masked figures fell to their knees, heads bowed low. Akita hesitated, then slowly opened the door, his calloused hand tightening around the hilt of his blade. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his weathered voice cutting through the eerie silence. One of the women raised her head, her mask glinting in the flickering torchlight. "Honored Akira, we come to you in our hour of greatest need," she said, her words laced with urgency. "Our peaceful clan is under siege by a tyrant warlord. He seeks to crush our way of life and enslave us all. We have heard tales of your legendary skill with the sword, your unparalleled courage. We beg you, please, lend us your strength to defend our people." Akita's brow furrowed as he listened, a lifetime of hard-won wisdom etched into the lines of his face. For years he had sworn off violence, choosing instead to live out his days in solitary contemplation, haunted by the horrors of his bloody past. But the plea in the woman's voice tugged at his heart, awakening the warrior spirit he had long suppressed. "And what makes you think I would risk my life for your clan?" he asked gruffly, though a glimmer of doubt crept into his voice. The woman lifted her head, her mask unable to conceal the desperation in her eyes. "Because you are a man of honor, Akita-san. We have heard the tales of your heroic deeds, the innocent lives you saved. We know you bear a heavy burden, but we beseech you, will you not heed our call?" Akita's gaze drifted to the katana at his side, the razor-sharp blade a constant companion in his exile. For so long he had shunned violence, yearning only for the peace he could never truly find. But now, confronted with the pleading faces of these brave women, the warrior's code that had once defined him stirred to life once more. With a heavy sigh, Akita nodded slowly. "Very well. I will lend you my aid." The women erupted in relieved cries, their tense shoulders sagging as if a great weight had been lifted. Akita held up a weathered hand, silencing them. "But know this, I do not make this decision lightly. The path of the warrior is a heavy burden, one I have tried to cast off for many years. If I am to take up my sword again, it will be for the last time." The women nodded solemnly, their postures now imbued with a newfound reverence. "We understand, Akira-san. Your sacrifice will not be forgotten." Without another word, Akira turned and strode back into his humble dwelling, the women following close behind. He moved with the grace of a man half his age, his steps sure and measured as he gathered his armor and supplies. As he donned the familiar garments, a strange sense of calm washed over him, as if he were being reunited with an old friend. When he emerged, the women gasped in awe, their eyes drinking in the sight of the legendary samurai, reborn. Akira's weathered face was set in a determined expression, his weathered hands gripping the hilt of his katana with the certainty of one who had faced death 1,000 times. "Lead the way," he said, his voice low and steady. The women exchanged a silent, grateful glance, then turned and vanished into the inky blackness of the night, Akira following close behind. As they descended the treacherous mountain path, Akira felt a stirring in his chest, a familiar fire that he had long thought extinguished. The call of the warrior had once again summoned him to action, and he knew deep in his bones that this would be his final battle. The women moved swiftly through the moonless night, Akira's imposing figure trailing behind them. Their sandaled feet padded softly along the winding mountain path, the only sound the occasional crack of a twig or rustle of leaves. Akira's mind raced, his senses hyper-alert. Years of solitary exile had dulled his edge, but now the familiar thrill of battle stirred within him. He clutched the hilt of his katana, its familiar weight reassuring in his calloused hand. As they descended deeper into the valley, the women suddenly halted, their bodies tensing. Akira followed their gaze and felt his blood run cold. In the distance, a plume of thick, black smoke rose into the night sky, obscuring the stars. The air was thick with the stench of burning wood and charred flesh. Akira's jaw tightened. "We're too late," one of the women whispered, her voice trembling. Without a word, they pressed on, their pace quickening. Akira's heart pounded in his chest, dread gnawing at his insides. As they rounded a bend, a horrific sight greeted them. The once peaceful village lay in smoldering ruins, flames licking at the charred remains of homes and buildings. Akira's breath caught in his throat as he surveyed the devastation. Scattered amid the ashes were the lifeless bodies of men, women, and children, their vacant eyes staring skyward, their limbs twisted at unnatural angles. Akira felt bile rise in his throat, the familiar weight of grief and guilt dragging him down. The women let out anguished cries, rushing toward the carnage. Akira followed, his mind numb with a sickening realization. He had been too late. His decision to help had come too late to save these innocent people. As they drew closer, Akira noticed movement among the rebel. A young woman, her once fine silk robes now tattered and stained, was crawling toward them, her face contorted in agony. "Help," she rasped, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please?" The women rushed to her side, cradling her in their arms. Akira knelt beside them, his weathered face etched with sorrow. "What happened here?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. The woman's eyes flickered open, and Akira was struck by the raw terror that burned within them. The warlord's men," she gasped, her breath rattling in her chest. They came without warning, burned everything, killed everyone." Akira felt a chill run down his spine. "Where are the others?" he asked, dreading the answer. The woman's lips trembled, her eyes brimming with tears. "Gone, all gone. They took them." Akira's heart sank. Took them where? The woman's grip on his arm tightened, her nails digging into his skin. The fortress. He wants them as slaves." Akira's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists. "Tell me where this fortress is." The woman shook her head weakly. "No, too late. You cannot save them now." Akira's eyes narrowed, a glimmer of determination sparking within them. "I must try." The woman's lips curved into a bitter smile. You do not understand. The warlord, he is a monster. His fortress, it is impregnable. You will only get yourself killed." Akira's gaze hardened. "I have faced death many times before. I will not abandon these people to their fate." The woman's eyes widened, a flicker of hope flashing across her face. Then you must hurry. They do not have much time." Akira nodded grimly, rising to his feet. He turned to the women, their faces etched with grief and fear. "I will go to this fortress and do what I can to rescue your people," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "But I cannot promise that I will succeed." The women exchanged anguished glances, their eyes filled with a desperate plea. "Please, Akira-san," one of them whispered, "you are our last hope." Akira softened, a glimmer of compassion flickering in his eyes. "I will do everything in my power to bring your people home," he said. "But if I should fall, you must promise me that you will flee this place and find safety." The women nodded, their faces etched with a solemn determination. "We will, Akira-san," one of them said, "but we will not abandon you to this fate." Akira's lips curved into a rueful smile. "We shall see." With that, he turned and strode toward the distant fortress, his hand gripping the hilt of his katana. The women watched him go, their hearts heavy with a mixture of hope and dread. As Akira trudged through the ruined village, his gaze swept over the carnage, his jaw tightening with each step.
The stench of death and the sight of the slain innocent lives filled him with a burning rage. He had thought he had left his days of violence and bloodshed behind, but now they had been thrust upon him once more. He paused at the edge of the village, his eyes scanning the horizon. In the distance, he could make out the outline of a towering fortress, its walls and turrets silhouetted against the night sky. Steeling his resolve, he pressed on, his steps quickening. As he drew closer, a sudden movement in the shadows caught his eye. He froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his sword. A figure emerged from the darkness, stepping into the pale moonlight. Akira's heart nearly stopped. It was a young woman, her delicate features partially obscured by a tattered scarf. Her eyes were wide with fear, and her trembling hands were bound in front of her. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Help me." Akira felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through his veins. Without a moment's hesitation, he drew his sword and charged toward the figure, his blade glinting in the moonlight. But as he drew closer, he froze in his tracks, his blood turning to ice in his veins. For the woman was none other than his own daughter, Hana, the child he had thought lost to him forever. Here is a new chapter, approximately 1,600 words, that continues the events described above with an impactful plot twist. Akira felt the world tilt beneath his feet as he stared at the trembling figure before him. His daughter Hana, his beloved child, lost to him for so many years, stood bound and terrified in the shadows. For a moment, Akira could only gape in stunned disbelief, his sword hanging uselessly at his side. It couldn't be true. It couldn't be her. After all this time, how was it possible? But as Hana lifted her head, their eyes met, and Akira knew with sickening certainty that it was her. Those deep brown eyes, so full of fear and anguish, they were etched into his memory, a constant reminder of the day his world had shattered. "Hana," he breathed, the name catching in his throat. "How?" Hana's expression crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Father," she whispered brokenly, "you have to help me. Please, you have to get me out of here." Akira's heart thundered in his chest as he rushed to her side, his hands trembling as he began working at the ropes binding her wrists. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice thick with emotion. "How did you end up here?" Hana's words came in a panicked rush. "They came without warning. The warlord's men. They destroyed everything, killed everyone. I tried to run, but they caught me. They're holding me in the fortress, planning to sell me as a slave." Akira felt a fresh wave of rage and despair wash over him. All these years, he had mourned Hana's loss, convinced that she was gone forever, and now to find her alive and in such peril.
"I'm getting you out of here," he vowed, his jaw tightening with determination. "Hold on, Hana. I'm going to—" But his words were cut short by the sudden sound of approaching footsteps. Whirling around, Akira shoved Hana behind him, his sword raised and ready. A handful of armed men emerged from the shadows, their faces obscured by dark masks. Akira recognized the insignia on their uniforms, the crest of the warlord. "There you are," one of the men growled, leveling his sword at Akira. "The master has been expecting you, old man." Akira's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on the hilt of his blade. "Then I shall not keep him waiting," he said, his voice low and deadly. The men surged forward, their blades flashing in the moonlight. Akira met their attack with a whirlwind of steel, his sword moving with a speed and precision that belied his age. One by one the men fell, their cries of pain echoing through the night. Hana watched in horrified fascination, her heart pounding in her chest. She had seen her father fight before, had marveled at his skill with the blade. But this was something else entirely. The man before her was a living, breathing legend, a warrior whose prowess was the stuff of whispered tales. As the last of the men crumpled to the ground, Akira turned to Hana, his eyes burning with an intensity she had never seen. "Come," he said, his voice broking no argument. "We must hurry. There will be more." Hana nodded shakily, her legs trembling as she followed her father toward the looming fortress. Akira moved with a purpose, his strides long and sure, his senses hyper-alert. But as they drew closer to the imposing structure, Hana suddenly froze, her eyes widening in horror. "Father, wait!" she cried, grabbing his arm. Akira whirled around, his brow furrowed with concern. "What is it?" Hana's face was pale, her expression etched with dread. "The warlord. He has my mother." Akira felt the blood drain from his face. "What?" "He captured her too," Hana whispered, her voice trembling. "He's holding her in the fortress, using her as a bargaining chip. If you try to rescue me, he'll—" She squeezed her eyes shut, a sob catching in her throat. Akira's mind raced, his heart pounding in his chest. All these years he had believed his wife to be dead, that he had lost her forever, and now to learn that she was alive, trapped in the clutches of this brutal warlord. He reached out and grasped Hana's shoulders, his weathered face etched with fierce determination.
Then we will save her too, he said, his voice hard and unyielding. I will not leave her behind. Hana stared at him, her eyes shining with a glimmer of hope. You really think we can do it? Akira's expression softened, and he gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. I will do whatever it takes, he promised. I've lost you both once before. I won't let it happen again. Hana nodded, her lips trembling in a watery smile. Then let's go. We have to hurry.
Together, they pressed on toward the fortress, their footsteps quickening with each stride. As they approached the towering gates, Akira's grip tightened on his sword, his mind racing with 1,000 possible scenarios. But as they drew closer, a new sound reached their ears, the distant clash of steel, punctuated by the agonized cries of men. Akira and Hana exchanged a startled glance, then quickened their pace, racing toward the source of the commotion. What they found made their blood run cold. In the shadow of the fortress, a fierce battle was raging. The women who had come to Akira for help were fighting for their lives against a horde of the warlord's armed men. Their katanas flashed in the moonlight as they battled with a desperate fury, their silk robes stained with the blood of their foes. But even as Akira and Hana watched, the women were being slowly overwhelmed, their numbers dwindling with each passing moment. Without a moment's hesitation, Akira charged into the fray, his sword cutting a swath through the enemy ranks. Hana followed close behind, her heart pounding in her chest as she watched her father fight with a ferocity she had never seen. The warlord's men fell one by one, their dying cries echoing through the night. Akira moved with a fluid grace, his sword a blur of steel as he parried and struck, his eyes narrowed with a fierce concentration. Hana found herself swept up in the chaos, her own blade clashing against those of her attackers. She fought with a desperate courage, driven by the knowledge that her mother's life hung in the balance. As the battle raged on, Akira caught a glimpse of a familiar face among the women, the same woman who had come to him for help. She was holding her own against a trio of burly soldiers, her movements swift and precise. Akira sought his way to her side, his sword flashing. "Where is the warlord?" he demanded, his voice barely audible over the din of battle. The woman's eyes widened in recognition, and she gestured toward the fortress. "Inside, with the prisoners. He's planning to execute them." Akira felt a chill run down his spine. "Then we must hurry," he said, his voice grim. The woman nodded, her expression resolute. "Go, Akira-san. We will hold them off as long as we can." Akira spared her a brief nod, then turned and charged toward the fortress, Hana at his heels. As they raced through the gates, a sense of dread began to build in the pit of Akira's stomach. He knew that time was running out, that he had to reach the prisoners before it was too late. But as they drew closer to the inner sanctum, a new sound reached their ears, the distant echo of a scream, high and agonized. Akira felt his heart lurch, and he redoubled his efforts, his strides lengthening. They burst through the doors of the inner chamber, and what they saw made their blood run cold.
Chained to the wall, their faces bruised and battered, were a group of terrified women and children. And standing before them, sword in hand, was the warlord himself, a hulking, savage-looking man with a cruel glint in his eyes. And beside him, held in his iron grip, was a woman Akira had thought lost to him forever. "Miyako," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. His wife, his beloved Miyako, met his gaze with eyes that were filled with a mix of relief and sheer terror. She opened her mouth to speak, but the warlord's blade pressed against her throat, silencing her. "Well, well," the warlord drawled, his voice thick with malice. "If it isn't the great Akira, come to rescue his precious family. How touching." Akira's grip tightened on his sword, his jaw clenching with fury. "Let them go, you monster," he snarled. The warlord let out a harsh laugh. "I don't think so, old man. You see, I have big plans for your family, and I can't very well have you interfering, can I?" With that, he drew back his sword, poised to strike. Akira's heart pounded in his chest as he watched, utterly powerless to stop the inevitable. "No," he cried, his voice echoing through the chamber. But as the warlord's blade descended, a sudden movement caught his eye. Hana had stepped forward, her own sword raised in a desperate, futile attempt to stop the killing blow. And in that moment, as time seemed to slow to a crawl, Akira knew with a sickening certainty that he was about to lose his daughter all over again. Here is a 1,600-word continuation of the story, written in a simple, conversational style with a shocking plot twist. I couldn't believe my eyes.
There was my dad, the legendary samurai Akira, standing in that dark fortress chamber, and right next to him, my mother, Miyako, alive after all these years. I thought she was gone forever, but here she was, trapped and terrified, held hostage by that evil warlord. When I saw the warlord's sword raised to strike her down, I didn't even think. I just reacted, rushing forward with my own blade, desperate to save her. I had to at least try, even if it was hopeless. But as I moved to block the blow, something incredible happened. In a blur of motion, my dad intercepted the warlord's sword with his own. The two blades clashed with a deafening ring, sparks flying. My heart was pounding as I watched them trade blows, their movements a beautiful, deadly dance. I'd seen my dad fight before, but never like this. Every strike was lightning fast, perfectly controlled. He fought with a ferocity I'd never witnessed, like a caged animal finally unleashed. It was mesmerizing and terrifying all at once. The warlord was no slouch either. He was massive, his muscles rippling under his armor as he swung his sword with bone-crushing force. But my dad matched him blow for blow, his weathered face set in a mask of grim determination. As they battled, I risked a glance at my mother.
She was staring at my dad, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and horror. I couldn't imagine what was going through her mind, seeing him fight like this after all these years. Suddenly, the warlord landed a brutal strike, knocking my dad's sword from his hand. I felt my stomach drop as the warlord raised his blade for the killing blow. But just before he struck, my dad reached into his robe and hurled something small and shiny at the warlord's face. It happened in the blink of an eye. The object struck the warlord's eye, and he let out an agonized scream, dropping his sword and clutching his face. I realized with a shock that it was a small throwing knife, one of my dad's hidden weapons. With the warlord temporarily incapacitated, my dad rushed to my mother's side, quickly freeing her from her chains. She threw her arms around him, tears streaming down her face. "Miyako," my dad whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I thought I'd lost you forever." My mother shook her head, a bitter smile on her lips. "And you. Oh, Akira, I've missed you so." They clung to each other for a long moment, oblivious to the chaos around them. I felt a lump in my throat, watching their reunion after all these years. But our moment of relief was shattered by a furious roar from the warlord. He had wrenched the knife from his eye, blood pouring down his face. His good eye burned with murderous rage as he picked up his sword and charged at us. My dad shoved my mother behind him, snatching up his own blade just in time to parry the warlord's savage attack. The two men clashed again, their swords ringing out in the cavernous chamber. As I watched horrified, I realized that the warlord was slowly overpowering my dad. His sheer size and strength were wearing my dad down, and I could see the fatigue beginning to show on his face. Suddenly, a movement in the corner of my eye caught my attention. I turned to see the other prisoners, the women and children from the village, watching the battle with terror-filled eyes. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. Gripping my sword tightly, I rushed to the prisoners and began frantically working to free them from their chains. They stared at me with a glimmer of hope, their hands trembling as I unlocked their shackles one by one. As I freed the last of them, a loud crash made me whirl around. My dad had been disarmed again, and the warlord had him pinned to the floor, his massive hands wrapped around my dad's throat. "This ends now, old man," the warlord growled, his voice thick with malice. "You and your meddlesome family have caused me enough trouble." I felt my heart racing as I watched, helpless to intervene. I knew my dad was no match for the warlord's brute strength, and I cursed myself for not being stronger, faster, better with a blade. But just as the warlord began to squeeze, something unexpected happened.
One of the freed prisoners, a young woman with a fierce determination in her eyes, suddenly rushed forward, snatching up the warlord's discarded sword. With a guttural scream, she brought the blade down, slicing deep into the warlord's back. He howled in pain, his grip on my dad's throat loosening. My dad wasted no time, using the opportunity to wrench himself free and scramble to his feet. He snatched up his own sword, his eyes blazing with a renewed fire. The warlord whirled around, murder in his gaze. But before he could react, my dad struck with lightning speed, his blade slicing cleanly through the warlord's throat. Time seemed to slow as the warlord's massive body crumpled to the floor, his life's blood pooling around him. My dad stood over him, chest heaving, his sword dripping crimson. For a long moment, the chamber was silent, save for the ragged breathing of the freed prisoners. Then, slowly, they began to gather around my dad, their eyes shining with awe and gratitude. My mother rushed to his side, grasping his arm. "Akira, you—" Her voice trailed off, thick with emotion. My dad turned to her, his weathered face softening. "I had to, Miyako. For you, for Hana, for all of us." He glanced around at the liberated prisoners, his expression solemn. I watched, transfixed, as the reality of what had just happened sank in. My dad, the legendary samurai who had sworn off violence, had just killed the warlord in order to save us. It was a shocking, almost unbelievable turn of events. But as I looked into my dad's eyes, I saw something there that I'd never seen before, a haunting sorrow, mixed with a glimmer of relief. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it made my heart ache. Suddenly, a commotion at the chamber of the temperatures drew our attention. The women who had come to my dad for help were rushing in, their faces alight with triumph. But their expressions quickly shifted to horror as they caught sight of the warlord's lifeless body. "Akira-san," one of them cried, her voice trembling. "What have you done?" My dad straightened, his jaw set. "I did what was necessary to protect my family and free your people," he said, his tone firm but laced with a subtle hint of regret. The woman shook her head, her eyes wide. But you've killed him. The warlord is dead. Do you have any idea what this means?" My dad's brow furrowed. "It means my family is safe and your people are free," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. The woman's expression darkened. "No, Akira-san, it means war. The warlord had many loyal followers, powerful men who will stop at nothing to avenge his death. They will come for us, for you, with all the fury of 1,000 demons." My dad's eyes widened, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I hadn't even considered the consequences of killing the warlord. Now, it seemed, we had unleashed a force that none of us could control. The woman turned to the other freed prisoners, her voice grave. "We must flee, all of us. This fortress is no longer safe. We have to get as far away from here as possible before they descend upon us." The prisoners erupted into a cacophony of fearful voices, some already rushing toward the exit. My mother gripped my dad's arm, her eyes pleading. "Akira, we have to go. We have to get Hana to safety," she said, her words laced with urgency. My dad's gaze flickered between my mother, the fleeing prisoners, and the lifeless body of the warlord. I could see the inner turmoil written on his face, the weight of the decision he had to make. Finally, he nodded, his expression resolute. "Then we must go, all of us." He turned to the woman who had warned us, his voice firm. "Lead the way. We'll be right behind you." The woman nodded, then turned and sprinted out of the chamber, the other prisoners following close behind. My mother grabbed my hand, and together we rushed after them, my dad bringing up the rear, his sword still clutched tightly in his hand. As we fled the fortress, my heart pounded in my chest. I couldn't help but wonder what the future held for us now. The warlord was dead, but at what cost, and what kind of retribution would his followers seek? One thing was certain, our lives would never be the same. We had stepped into a new, dangerous chapter, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of fear about what lay ahead. But as I glanced back at my dad, his face etched with a grim determination, I knew that no matter what happened, he would do whatever it took to protect our family, and that in itself gave me a glimmer of hope. Here's a 1,600-word continuation in a simple, conversational style with a shocking plot twist. We ran for what felt like hours, the freed prisoners and my family fleeing through the dark forest. Every snap of the twig or rustle of leaves had us all on edge, convinced the warlord's men were closing in. My heart was pounding the whole time, filled with a mix of fear and adrenaline. Finally, we reached a small clearing and collapsed, gasping for breath. I looked around at the exhausted, terrified faces of the other survivors. We'd managed to escape the fortress, but at what cost? The warlord was dead, but now we were running for our lives. My dad stood off to the side, his weathered face etched with worry. I could tell he was thinking hard, trying to figure out our next move. "Father, what do we do now?" I asked him, my voice trembling. He turned to me, his eyes filled with a rare uncertainty. I'm not sure, Hana. This was not how I expected things to unfold." My mother came up beside him, placing a hand on her arm. "Akira, those men, the woman spoke of, the warlord's followers, they'll be coming for us, won't they?" My dad nodded grimly. "Yes, and I fear they will show us no mercy." The fear in the air was palpable as the other survivors huddled together, whispering frantically. I could see it in their faces. They were all wondering the same thing. Had we traded one nightmare for another?
Suddenly, one of the women let out a terrified cry. "Look! In the trees!" We all whirled around, hands grasping for our weapons. Silhouetted figures were emerging from the shadows, moving stealthily through the underbrush. My breath caught in my throat as I realized they were armed, swords and spears glinting in the moonlight. "The warlord's men," my dad growled, his fingers tightening around the hilt of his katana. "Get behind me, all of you!" We scrambled to obey, crowding together as the armed figures advanced. I clutched my own sword, my palms sweating. I'd never been so scared in my life. The first of the warlord's men burst into the clearing, their faces hidden by dark masks. With a savage cry, they charged toward us, blades raised high. My dad met them head-on, his sword flashing. The sound of steel on steel rang out, echoing through the trees. I watched in awe as he fought, his every move precise and deadly. But even as he cut down one attacker after another, more seemed to take their place. The warlord's men were relentless, driven by a thirst for vengeance. Suddenly, a movement at the edge of the clearing caught my eye. I turned to see a large, hulking figure emerging from the shadows, and my blood ran cold. It was the warlord himself, his massive frame towering over us. But his face, it was a grotesque, mangled mess, his right eye a gaping, bloody ruin. "You," he roared, his voice thundering through the night. "You will all pay for what you've done." My dad whirled around, his eyes widening in shock. "Impossible," he breathed. The warlord let out a guttural laugh, his remaining eye burning with savage fury. "Did you really think a mere blade could end me, old man?" He raised his own sword, its edge glinting wickedly. "Now you will all suffer for your insolence." With that, he charged forward, his men surging in behind him. My dad barely had time to react before the warlord was upon him, their blades clashing with bone-jarring force. I watched, frozen in horror, as the two titans of steel battled. My dad fought with every ounce of his legendary skill, but the warlord's sheer size and strength were overwhelming. Slowly, inexorably, my dad was being driven back. The other survivors scattered, screaming in terror as the warlord's men pressed in around us. I tried to fight, to help my dad, but I was no match for their savage onslaught. Suddenly, a hand grasped my arm, yanking me backward. It was my mother, her face etched with panic. "Hannah, we have to go," she cried, her voice barely audible over the din of battle. "Your father, he can't hold him off much longer." I stared at her, my heart pounding. "But we can't just leave him," I protested. Her grip tightened, her eyes pleading. "We have no choice. If we stay, we'll be slaughtered. We have to run, Hannah." "Please, we have to go." I hesitated, torn between my desperate desire to help my dad and the overwhelming fear for my own life. In the end, the instinct for survival won out, and I let my mother pull me away, fleeing into the darkness. As we ran, I couldn't help but glance back, my vision blurred by tears. I caught one last glimpse of my dad, his sword clashing against the warlord's, his face a mask of grim determination. Then he was lost amid the chaos of the battle, swallowed by the sea of attackers. My heart shattered, and I knew in that moment that I might never see him again. We ran for what felt like an eternity, the sounds of the battle fading into the distance. Finally, we emerged into a small clearing, gasping for breath. I looked around at the other survivors, their faces etched with anguish and terror. Where are the others?" one of the women asked, her voice trembling. My mother shook her head, her eyes brimming with tears. I don't know. We had to run. We had no choice." The woman's face crumpled, and she sank to her knees, burying her face in her hands. The others gathered around her, offering what comfort they could, but I could see the same devastating realization in their eyes. We had abandoned our loved ones to their fate, and now we had no idea if they were alive or dead. I felt a crushing weight in my chest, the guilt and anguish threatening to overwhelm me. How could we have just left them behind? My dad, fighting for his life against that monster of a warlord. Suddenly, a rustling in the undergrowth made us all freeze, our hands flying to our weapons. But instead of the warlord's men, a familiar figure emerged, stumbling and bloodied, but very much alive. "Father!" I cried, rushing toward him.
Akira staggered forward, his face etched with a mixture of relief and utter devastation. "Hana, Miyako," he rasped, his voice ragged. My mother ran to him, throwing her arms around him. "Akira, you're alive," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. But as she pulled back, her expression shifted to one of horror. Where are the others?" she asked, her gaze sweeping the small group. Akira's eyes squeezed shut, a shudder passing through him. "Gone," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "They're all gone." My heart sank, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "No," I breathed, the word catching in my throat. "No, that can't be." Akira opened his eyes, and I was shocked by the depths of the anguish I saw there. I couldn't save them," he said, his voice cracking. "The warlord, he shook his head, his lips trembling. My mother grasped his arm, her face etched with dread. "Akira, what happened?" He took a shuddering breath, his gaze dropping to the ground. He was too strong. I fought him, but he..." His voice trailed off, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Suddenly, a new sound reached our ears, the distant rumble of hoofbeats, growing steadily louder.
We all froze, our blood running cold. "They're coming," Akira whispered, his eyes widening with terror. "We have to go, now!" Without another word, he grabbed our hands and pulled us deeper into the forest, his steps laced with a frantic desperation. I glanced back, catching a glimpse of dark figures on horseback emerging from the trees, and my heart nearly stopped. The warlord's men had found us, and this time I knew with a sinking dread there would be nowhere left to run. As we fled through the dense underbrush, my mind raced with 1,000 horrific scenarios. What had happened back there, in that clearing? Where were the others? And most terrifying of all, what fate awaited us at the hands of the warlord's relentless pursuers? I glanced at my parents, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and steely determination. They were running for their lives, just as I was, but I could see the weight of their grief and guilt weighing them down. Whatever had transpired back there, it had shattered them. And now, as we ran for our lives, I couldn't help but wonder if we were truly any safer than the others. The thundering hoofbeats were closing in, the air thick with the scent of blood and the cries of our pursuers. I felt a rising panic, the knowledge that this might be the end threatening to overwhelm me. But even as I stumbled through the darkness, one thought kept me going, the desperate hope that somehow, some way, we might all make it out of this alive, because the alternative was too horrific to even consider. Here is the 1,600-word final chapter to conclude the story. We ran for what felt like hours, the sound of the warlord's men thundering behind us. My lungs were burning, my legs aching, but I knew we couldn't stop. If we slowed down, they would catch us. I glanced back and caught a glimpse of them, dark shadows on horseback, their swords glinting in the moonlight. The fear coursing through me gave me an extra burst of speed, and I pressed on, desperate to outrun them. Up ahead, I could see my dad leading the way, my mom clutching his hand. He looked exhausted, his face etched with grief, but he refused to slow down. I knew he was blaming himself for what happened back there, for not being able to save the others. It was written all over him. Finally, we reached a dense thicket, and my dad yanked us all behind it, signaling for us to be quiet. We crouched down, trying to catch our breath, as the thundering hoofbeats grew closer and closer. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my ears, as the warlord's men rode past our hiding spot. I could see the fury on their faces, the murder in their eyes. It made my blood run cold. Once they had passed, my dad turned to us, his expression grave. "We have to keep moving," he whispered. "They'll be back, and next time, they won't give up so easily." My mom nodded, her grip on his hand tightening. "Where do we go, Akira? We can't keep running forever."
My dad's brow furrowed, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. "There's a small village, a few hours' ride from here. We might be able to find shelter and supplies there." "And then what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What happens when they catch up to us again?" My dad's gaze hardened. "Then we fight," he said, his tone brooking no argument. I felt a chill run down my spine. After what had happened back at the fortress, I didn't know if I had the strength to face those monsters again. The thought of losing anyone else was almost too much to bear. But as I looked into my dad's eyes, I saw a glimmer of determination that I recognized. This was the legendary samurai, the warrior who had sworn to protect his family no matter the cost. And I knew in that moment that he would do whatever it took to keep us safe. With a deep breath, we set off again, my dad and mom leading the way. The journey to the village was long and arduous, and we had to stop several times to hide from the warlord's men. Each time the fear gnawed at my insides, the memory of the fallen haunting me. Finally, as the first hints of dawn began to creep over the horizon, we reached the outskirts of the village. It was a modest place, with simple wooden houses and a small market square, but to us it felt like a sanctuary. As we stepped into the village, the locals eyed us with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. My dad approached one of the elders, his voice low and urgent. "Please, we need your help," he said. "We're being pursued by a ruthless warlord and his men. Can you offer us shelter and aid?" The elder studied him for a long moment, his brow furrowed. Then, to our relief, he nodded. "Come, you are welcome here." He turned and gestured for us to follow. We were led to a small, cozy house on the edge of the village, where the elder's family welcomed us with open arms. As we settled in, my dad pulled the elder aside, his expression grave. "How long do you think we can stay here before they find us?" he asked. The elder's face darkened. "I'm not sure," he admitted, "but you can be certain they will come. These men, they show no mercy." My dad's jaw tightened, and I could see the weight of the decision he was about to make. "Then we must leave as soon as possible," he said. "We can't put your people in danger." The elder opened his mouth to protest, but my dad raised a hand, silencing him. "It's the only way to keep you safe. We'll be moving on before they can trace us here." The elder sighed heavily, his eyes filled with sympathy. "I understand. Then you must take what you need and go before it's too late." My dad nodded, then turned to us, his expression grave. "We leave at first light," he announced. "We can't risk staying here any longer." My mom's face fell, and I felt my heart sink. "But Akira, where will we go?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," my dad admitted, his gaze drifting to the floor.
But we have to keep moving, keep them from finding us. The rest of the day was a blur of frantic preparations. We gathered what meager supplies we could, packing light for the journey ahead. I watched my parents, their faces etched with a mixture of determination and anguish, and my heart ached for them. They had lost so much, been through so much horror, and now they were forced to run again, with no guarantee of safety or respite. It just didn't seem fair. As the sun began to set, we bid farewell to the kind villagers, their faces filled with worry and sorrow. I caught a glimpse of the elder, his gaze filled with a silent understanding. "May the gods watch over you," he murmured, clasping my dad's hand. My dad nodded, his expression solemn. "And you, my friend, be vigilant, and may your village remain untouched by the warlord's wrath." With that, we turned and set off into the gathering darkness, our small group a mere speck on the horizon. I glanced back, watching as the village faded into the distance, and felt a pang of loss. Would we ever find a place to call home again? Or were we doomed to forever be hunted, forced to live in the shadows? As we trudged onward, the weight of our losses hung heavy in the air. I couldn't stop thinking about the others, the brave women who had trusted us, who had fought and died to save their people. And I knew my parents were wrestling with the same agonizing guilt. Finally, as the first hint of dawn began to peep over the horizon, we came upon a small, secluded cave. My dad paused, his gaze sweeping the area, then nodded. "This will do," he said, his voice low. "We'll rest here for a few hours, then continue on." We huddled together in the cave, the flickering light of a small fire casting shadows on the walls. I watched my parents, their faces weary but resolute, and I felt a surge of admiration and love. They had been through hell, had lost so much, and yet they still pressed on, determined to keep us safe. I knew then that no matter what lay ahead, we would face it together, as a family. After a short rest, we set out again, our pace quickened by the fear of pursuit. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, we pushed on, our legs aching and our spirits heavy.
But just when I thought I couldn't take another step, we crested a hill, and I felt a glimmer of hope stir within me. In the distance, nestled between the rolling hills, was a sprawling estate. Its grand, ornate gates a stark contrast to the humble villages we had passed. And standing guard at the entrance were a group of armed men, their uniforms bearing a familiar insignia. My dad's steps faltered, and I saw the color drain from his face. "The Shogun's men," he breathed, his voice laced with disbelief. My mom grasped his arm, her eyes wide. "Akira, do you think?" He nodded slowly, his brow furrowed. "It's our only chance," he said, his tone resolute. "We have to try."
Without another word, he led us down the hill, toward the towering estate. As we approached the gates, the armed guards straightened, their hands tightening on their weapons. "Halt!" one of them barked. "State your business." My dad stepped forward, his expression solemn. "I am Akira, and I seek an audience with the shogun. I have information of the utmost importance." The guards exchanged a startled glance, then one of them nodded. "Very well. Follow me." As we were ushered through the gates, I felt a strange mix of trepidation and hope. We were placing our fate in the hands of a man we had never met, a man who held the power to either grant us sanctuary or condemn us to an even worse fate. But as I looked at my parents, their faces etched with a resolve born of desperation, I knew that we had no other choice. This was our last chance to escape the warlord's wrath, to find a safe haven where we could finally put down roots and rebuild our shattered lives. The journey through the estate was a blur, and before long we found ourselves in a grand, opulent chamber, face to face with a stern-faced man whose bearing and attire marked him as the shogun himself. My dad stepped forward, his voice steady. "My lord, I come to you in a time of great need. My family and I have fled the tyranny of a warlord, and we begged for your protection." The shogun's brow furrowed, his gaze sweeping over us. "And what information do you have that would warrant such a request?" he asked, his tone measured. My dad took a deep breath. "This warlord, he is a monster. He has amassed a vast army, and he seeks to crush all who stand in his way. He must be stopped before he can spread his terror throughout the land." The shogun's eyes narrowed, and I felt my heart race. Would he believe us? Would he offer us the sanctuary we so desperately needed? After a long, tense moment, the shogun inclined his head. "Very well, Akira. You and your family shall be granted refuge within these walls, and I will hear what you have to say about this warlord." Relief flooded my body, and I felt my mom's hand squeeze my own, her eyes shining with grateful tears. We had done it. We had found a safe haven, a chance to start anew. As we followed the shogun's guards deeper into the estate, I couldn't help but glance back, my gaze sweeping the distant horizon. I knew that the warlord and his men would come for us, that our respite would be fleeting. But in that moment, I didn't care. We were alive, and we were together. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I allowed myself to hope that we might finally find the peace and safety we so desperately craved. The road ahead would be long and arduous, I knew that, but with my family by my side, I was ready to face whatever challenges lay in wait. We had survived the darkness, and now it was time to step into the light.